Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. All right. So, I've started the recording. This is a very professional way of starting a video. What's up, everybody? I'm joined by Billy. Billy is currently semi-sweating basketball because he's a strange cat. But we're not focused on basketball right now. We're focused on League of Legends. So,
We are
Billy, are you ready for the eGOAT rankings?
ready to do it, man. Let's dive in.
All right. First up, LCS. Give me what you got.
All right. Common refrain, not a lot of change. Although I think as we get through these, there'll be a little bit more than we've seen in some of our past videos. Just given that it's been a little bit longer since I put these out publicly with start of basketball, the restart of basketball rather. So up top, Cloud9 still, but I guess for perspective, that they're eGOAT right now is about 5,500. If you go back, 4 weeks ago, they're closer to 7,500. They were even creeping up towards 8,000 earlier in the summer split. So they're definitely, coming back down towards the field with these losses and unspectacular wins, but still up top by a substantial margin. Then we go down to Team Liquid, followed by FlyQuest and TSM. In a tier with 100 Thieves behind them, followed by Golden Guardians. CLG are always sort of fulcrum between the two of us. Evil Geniuses is in 8th. Dignitas and Immortals in the basement. The final two there. Good 75 or 750 below Evil Geniuses, so there's a pretty big gap there in my numbers between them and the other 8.
Yeah, so it sounds like the main things that are different are EG, Golden Guardians, and CLG. So I have Immortals, Dignitas, and CLG as the 3 worst teams in the league, and I think it's pretty I think there's a pretty big gap between them right now, because like when I go into a slate and I see 2 of those teams playing against each other, I know it's kind of like whatever, like either team can kind of win. If any of those teams played against 100 Thieves, I feel like I would just be extremely confident that 100 Thieves should win the match, or like that they'd be a pretty big favorite. And then with Evil Geniuses, I mean, they're starting to scare me a little bit because Sven Skaren has looked pretty bad in some of his recent performances. Like at one point, have you noticed how sometimes they'll put like an emote above their head, where like it's a picture just pops up above a player's head? Have you seen that at all or no?
But like, do I know what emotes are?
Yeah.
Is that the question? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and I'm also aware that it's like new. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm up. I feel like I'm relatively up to date on the emote situation.
Yeah. So Sven Skaren emoted. There was going to be a dragon fight. EG was like trying to walk in towards the dragon pit past. I think they were playing against Dignitas. Whoever it was, they were supposed to win that game. So he's walking. It actually might have been FlyQuest. So he's walking in the river, and like Trundle throws up a pillar. So now Volibear is slowed. Instead of just like flashing away or ulting away or like running away fast, he starts emote spamming, and he gets hit by an Ash arrow, and then he dies. And then like they gave up a dragon for free. It was so tilting. Like I could not believe that he did that. Like nobody said anything about it either, and it tilted me off the face of the earth.
Intentionally, or do you think could that possibly be a misclick?
No,
He was just trying to
He was just trying to He was like, "Oh, I'm so afraid of you. Here's my emote. Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
I just got arrowed." And the thing is, like Volibear is one of the champions that could actually like outplay that situation by like if you see an Ash arrow flying at you, you can use his ultimate to hop away, and during that animation, he can't be stopped. So like he'll eat the stun and a portion of that time that he's supposed to be stunned, and he'll be somewhere else. So it's like not a big deal. But yeah, basically for the LCS, what I have is C9, Team Liquid, and TSM as the top tier. FlyQuest, EG, and Golden Guardians as the next tier. I know EG's rough right now. Like talent-wise, I can't move them down much further, but I understand like they look like garbage a lot of the time. And they're
I mean, I think we've spent a decent amount of time in past weeks talking about I think why there's a separation there.
Yeah. a lot of their drafting has been horrible, and every time there's a bad draft, I like tweet the guy that's in charge of analytics for Evil Geniuses. I'm like, hey man, what's
I saw
going
a
on,
few of them
man?
over the weekend.
Yeah, it was like the first time I was pretty rude about it, but like I didn't mean to be rude about it, but I was annoyed and like tilted. Uh, yeah, and then I have 100 Thieves in seventh basically, and then I have Immortals, Dignitas, and CLG. And the way that I put it last week when I was making my picks was that if I had to pick a team to fight, if I had to pick a team to act as my champion and like fight for me in a duel to save my life, I would pick Immortals over Dignitas or CLG. If it was like my life was on the line, I would pick them. And that's always a great litmus test for how much you believe in a team. Is would they defend your life?
Yeah, and look, I think to your point, there's a huge gap in my numbers, which I failed to pick up on as I was going through them earlier, between Golden Guardians and CLG. So with the exception of Evil Geniuses, I think the eGOAT numbers certainly support your what you just said about CLG, Dignitas, and Immortals being in that bottom tier by quite a significant margin.
Good. All right. Next up, LEC. For mine, I have Mad Lions, G2, Rogue, Fnatic in the top tier, and it's funny because, like, in the the ego rankings probably seem justified now. I'm assuming G2 is still in first place.
They are, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it feels like they finally like caught up with themselves and they're not trolling everybody. And then in the second, I have two tiers in Europe. I have the top tier and then everybody else. I have Mad Lions, G2, Rogue, Fnatic, and then I have SK, Misfits, Origin, XL, Vitality, and Schalke. And there's a lot of movement in that bottom part.
Yeah. The ego rankings for the LEC just keep getting more and more condensed, and but I guess within that they've broken down into some pretty clear tiers. So G2 is still in first with a little over a 1,000 gold lead. Mad Lions and Fnatic are very, very close in the next tier in that order. SK and Rogue very, very close together below them, but a little bit of a gap. Mm-hmm. Another little gap with Schalke now in sixth, or is that right? Sixth, yes. And Excel in seventh, very close together. Another little gap with Vitality. Another little gap, Misfits and Origin, very close together at the bottom.
That's interesting. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say about stuff like that because, like, Misfits and Origin, it's funny because, like, eGOAT is picking up on. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say picking up on, but eGOAT is basically like what I would expect somebody's rankings to look like if they had expectations for Misfits and Origin going into the split, and like they've significantly underperformed relative to their expectations. So like it makes sense that they're at the bottom, and then it's also saying like gold wise they're at the bottom, but not because of, it's like it's expectations agnostic, right?
It is. Yeah. So I'm just thinking through the math and trying to figure out if there was anything that's in there.
Yeah, could it have led it some way? Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think so. No.
Yeah. So that's funny because, like, it makes sense with a couple of the recent trends. So like Schalke going upwards, like you would expect them to get closer, but not necessarily taking over these other teams when they've been so bad the entire split.
Yeah.
So I guess that means like some of their losses could be qualified as good losses if they were kept really close. Like. I think maybe that's a way of trying to understand it.
That's absolutely a big part of it. So like that was where my brain was going a little bit. To the extent that Misfits has won games, but not by as much as we would have expected. It's not like all wins are not created equal for purposes of these rankings.
Yeah.
So so there's sort of it's correlated, but not causation in that respect. And then with Schalke, I mentioned Gilead specifically last week. Schalke was I got crushed on the LEC slates the first couple of weeks because Schalke was very high. Part of that was the bias that I've mentioned a few times with no league adjustments guys that get called up from the minors, for lack of a for my sort of
Yeah.
layman's
Yep.
terminology there, do not get a discount.
Hmm.
So so some of these guys on the we've talked about their 10-man roster. Some of these guys that played in like the EUM tournament were overrated in my numbers. Some of that's lingering. They might have a couple games from the end of the first split. But they've won 5 games against teams that have performed well this split. So they went down to the basement and climbed back up. So I don't know how much is really attributable to that early season bias.
Yeah. It's just so funny how that can happen. I would never expect a stat like eGOAT to push Origin and Misfits that far down, but because it's I can see it both ways. Like Schalke has quote unquote good wins according to like goal differential, but in reality, like we've talked about wanting to bet on teams that are riskier and willing to make the risky play in order to get back in the game, which is going to make the goal differential much worse for them. But you know what I mean? It's a weird thing to kind of balance.
Yeah.
Because I would almost prefer my teams to lose by like a ton all the time, as opposed to keeping it like quote unquote within striking distance, but requiring the team that's winning to make a gigantic mistake. Because that's kind of how people play it, and they get bled out a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
anything else you want to add for LEC?
The only thing I just opened up like a tab that sort of has the essentially like with a adjustment to each team's ego on a game by game basis. The average change in ego in a game is 10. It's not 0, I think, because for the reasons we just mentioned, you sort of have these games where guys are playing in leagues that are not on my in sort of represented here. It's just the 6 that I post. And so just with the baseline that 10 is average, the last 4 games for Schalke, they've added 272, 125, 169, 145. So it really is just this 4-game winning streak over the last 2 weeks that have shot them back up into the middle, combined with what I mentioned earlier, that the LEC is just really close together, generally speaking.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go to the LCK. All right. So in the LCK, I have a top tier of Damwon Gaming, DRX, T1, and Gen G, and like there's probably a tier within that tier right now where like Damwon Gaming and DRX are playing much better than T1 and Gen G, like when those teams are playing against one another. But like in terms of talent plus form plus how they've done this season, like relative to all of the other teams, I feel like it makes more sense to keep them all tied together. So I have those 4 teams, and then a pretty significant gap. Then I have a Freak of Freaks, and then the next tier I have KT Rolster, Sandbox, and Team Dynamics, and then in the last tier I have Hanwha Life and Solhewan Prince.
Right. That all lines up pretty closely with what I have here. Damwon up top, and they've created a little bit of separation for themselves over the past couple weeks with the win streak. Gen G in second, DRX in third, T1 in fourth. All 3 of those together, and those 4 teams. There's, as I mentioned, there's the small gap after Damwon, big gap after T1, down to a Freak of Freaks, Sandbox, and KT in that order, all pretty close together. Then a gap, Dynamics and Hanwha close together. Another gap, and Solhewan in the basement.
Yeah, I mean that I don't really have much to say about that. We're on the same page because like
Yeah.
Even in that like tier that I was mentioning with Sandbox, KT Rolster, and Team Dynamics, like I would probably have Team Dynamics, or no, yeah, with those 3 teams, I would probably have Team Dynamics, the one that I think is the weakest because of like my uncertainty around a lot of their players. Like I just don't think that they're that good.
Did they like get figured out in some respect? It felt like they were playing better at the beginning of the split than they are now. But maybe it was just just the variance.
Yeah, I kind of think it was a little bit of variance, and I think that people were probably giving them too much credit. Like, at least three of these players should have been like known quantities going into these games, where it's like we know how Kuzan is going to play in the mid lane. We know how their support's Guger, right? We know how Guger plays, and then
Rich was a LCK player too, right? Before.
well, Rich played a different video game, but he was like a professional Heroes of the Storm player. But people knew what Rich did. Like he was a one-trick pony, and people knew what he did. Like it was like he is an Aatrox player, and he plays some Lucian. So the question was always going to be like, what other champions does he know how to play at a very high level? So I was pretty, because like they were basically, I think, giving him those champions in the beginning of the split, saying like, okay, let us see what you can actually do, and then he would beat them every once in a while, or at least like positively contribute to the team. But like the jungle, mid lane, and support, I had no faith in going into the season, and it's kind of going that direction right now. Hanwha Life, I think, does make sense to have them above Solhewan Prince. I didn't think that they were as close to Team Dynamics, but that's more, your eGOAT ranking is more in line with how I feel than the tier list that I put out. I just feel like it has them closer, which is probably more correct. And then Solhewan Prince, I think that I like Solhewan Prince's style because they're not afraid to lose big.
Viper's the ADC on SP, right?
On Hanwha Life.
On Hanwha Life. Whose SP is?
They have
is that
Trigger?
Mickey and
Hybrid and Trigger, I think.
Hybrid and Trigger. Okay, yeah. I always get those two rosters mixed up until I look it up. When they're on the slate. So okay, I probably like Hanwha Life anymore. I like Viper from a DFS. Always cheap. Might pop off one game and get you some kills. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I do like Viper, and I think as time goes on, I think that Hanwha Life, if we see something like we're seeing right now in the LPL, where teams just start beating top tier teams and it makes no sense to anybody. Oh, basketball.
What's going on there? What's going on there?
Yeah.
No. What is going on there was about the LPL.
Oh, because I saw you look to the side with I saw you look to the left for your basketball screen, and I thought you were freaking out about what was going on in the game.
No. It did distract me, but it was just them going to commercial and the quick cuts.
That's pretty funny.
I'm very simple.
Yeah. If the LPL. If the LPL effect happens in LCK, where a bunch of bad teams start beating a bunch of good teams, I think Hanwha Life is one of the teams that can do that, because you'll get into spots where it's kind of narrative based. So if you were at the end of a football season and one team really needed the win and the other team was eliminated from the playoffs and just didn't give a shit and could kind of just play balls to the wall for the entire game, you would have some of those games where it's this team doesn't even have anything to play for, and they're beating the number 3 projected seed in the playoffs right now. Yeah. So I could see,
and you see that NBA even right when teams just go out and play small ball with their G League team or something, and they just shoot 100 threes. So yeah, it certainly that's. I was going to ask you if there was any type of heads or tails you could make of what's going on there, but that certainly makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think it's two things, and I think it is really narrative based, and they're the old adages where it's people get stressed out when they're in a must-win situation, or they feel like it's a game that they shouldn't even have to try, and they'll just be given a free win because they're so much better than the other players, but in reality they're not. We don't know when it's going to happen, but when you see it happen, you feel like it's obvious that it's happening. So when a team like LGD gets slapped around by LNG, it's does LGD really care about this game? Do they really need this for playoffs? Can they really change their fate that much in the playoffs by getting a win as opposed to a loss?
Is it top 6 make the playoffs in the LPL?
I think it's 8.
8.
I think it's top 8, and I think that there's there are buys involved and stuff
like that. Yeah, double buys and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we see Hanwha Life play against some of these top tier teams, if those top tier teams, when they're stressed out or in close matches, have a tendency to play slow macro games, those are the games that I think Hanwha Life has a really good chance of winning, because that's when Viper and Lehens could theoretically carry a match. And
sure.
And we've seen it where like last split, a game like that was kind of happening between Hanma Life and Afrika Freaks, I think, and or APK Prince. It was APK Prince against Hanma Life. Was it Hanma Life? It might have been. Who was it? It was definitely Viper. Viper was definitely involved, and they were playing against. I think it was APK Prince when they were still APK Prince, and Viper just went out of control in all 3 games and scored a bajillion points. And it's like the high volatility just helped him for some reason, even though they typically play slow games. But that's basically all we need for LCK. So I think so far we've been pretty close, which is interesting.
Maybe it's Griffin APK, you said?
I think so.
Yeah. 518 and then 220 and then 907. Pretty good.
No, I think there was a different one then. It might have been Sol Heywan Prince against the Freaka Freaks, actually, where it was hybrid going off and Mystic going off. It was two teams that just weren't very good last split. But that's enough of that. So let's go to everybody's favorite, the LPL.
Everybody's favorite.
So I'll go first. I still think Dominus and LNG are the worst teams in the league. LNG's win last night was obviously huge. I haven't changed my rankings since yesterday, so like I'm not gonna upgrade LNG until next week if I decide to upgrade them. But I have LNG and Dominus as the 2 worst teams. Then I have BLG, OMG, Rogue Warriors, and E-Star. Then I have RNG and Vici Gaming, which I think there's a pretty distinct difference between RNG and Vici Gaming versus BLG in my mind, according to like talent and how I think they're going to operate long term. Like if Vici Gaming played against BLG, I would pick Vici Gaming. Do I think that BLG could win that match? Sure, but like I would rather be on the Vici Gaming side. And then RNG is like the first playoff team, or the first team fighting for playoffs right now. So we have that as the B tier. Then we have FPX, Sunning, V5, LGD, EDG, and Team World Elite all in one tier. And the reason I kind of have it in one tier is because LGD, EDG, and World Elite, if they played against each other and any of them won the match, I wouldn't even know how to separate between the 2 teams without doing like a deep dive into champion pools for specific matchups when they're playing against each other. Like if they're playing random team from LPL, I think they're all basically the same. Basically all the same. And then the top 3 teams, I still have top esports, Invictus Gaming, and JDG as the first tier of teams.
All right. So these are interesting. This is where there's been some pretty, frankly, weird stuff going on in the eGOAT rankings over the last couple weeks.
Sure.
So Rogue Warriors still in the basement for reasons previously discussed, and Dominus right there with them. In the next tier up is kind of BLG by themselves, also not very good. Mm-hmm. Then in the next tier up, in order from top to bottom, is OMG, E-Star, then LNG, and then Vici, who has, LNG got a lot of credit for the wins last night because they were so decisive.
Yeah.
And so all of these teams, it's more that LNG has jumped up too far, and when presumably whoever plays them next takes them behind the woodshed, they'll drop back down to that sort of BLG level. But Vici was hovering around middle of the pack for a long time, so they've definitely taken a fall separately from that. The next one is the weird tier to me. These are teams that both teams do well in my more general model, are always projected to win, even though they're bottom half now in the eGOAT rankings, and that's FPX in Team WE. I don't really know why. I like both of those teams. I almost feel like it's just these numbers are here to sort of temper me when they're on the slate, so that I don't go all in and get crushed. But yeah, so those are 2 surprises to me, that those 2 are so low.
Yeah.
Next tier up, in order, Suning, then V5, then LGD. The next tier up are the surprising overachievers in EDG in fourth and RNG in fifth.
Mm-hmm.
And then the top tier is the same as yours, very close together, but JDG holds on to the top spot, although they've fallen off a decent clip in the last week or two. Invictus Gaming just continues to charge up, and top esports in third.
Yeah, so Fun Plus Phoenix and Team World Elite, I think that FPX especially is a better real life team than DraftKings team or like a team to bet on, because you can feel pretty confident that they're going to win a match, but it doesn't mean they're going to go 2-0 because they've looked really shaky. They make a lot of weird decisions. They've been changing up their roster. They've just been kind of disappointing in every way possible. So I always have to remind myself when I'm like making DraftKings lineups, these players don't care about getting kills. Like, I mean, they do, but it's really about winning the game for a team like FPX. Do and B will do just weird stuff that is annoying to watch, and like split pushing, creating pressure on different parts of the map, not necessarily like contributing to a team fight, or not contributing to every team fight as like an initiator or something like that. A lot of the time he'll just be off in the middle of nowhere creating pressure, and he doesn't do that every single match, but that's always in the realm of possibilities or within the range of outcomes because of the focus on winning, which I think more teams should probably be doing, but it's kind of whatever. Team World Elite, I think that this ranking makes more sense because they do have that gigantic question mark of Teacher Ma in terms of like actual talent, but I don't like kind of leaning on that because I feel like it might just be like a crutch and like not real, and if nobody knew about that narrative coming out of like the Chinese media, maybe that wouldn't even been a question, you know, because like people were saying the whole getting kicked off the team for not being able to maintain a rank or whatever. But his champion pool seems so bad. Like in their last match, I think they blind picked Silas 3 games in a row, or like they locked him in early 3 games in a row, and every single time I'm like, what is going on? Because Silas is the kind of champion where if he doesn't have a good ultimate to steal from the other team, then he basically doesn't have an ultimate. So it's like you're giving up a ton of power in your champion's kit in order to take something like that. So maybe they were trying to use it as like a blocker pick, where it's like, we're going to pick Silas so that you don't pick a champion with a really strong ultimate, but then you're just hurting yourself and hurting the other team. It was
your
really
entire
weird.
draft strategy is then focused around trying to cover up that one spot.
Yeah, and because there are champions that are good in the meta right now that you can pick that don't necessarily have really impactful ults that Silas can steal. So like he picked it against, I think it was like Bard, where Bard's ultimate is great, but you're not going to get any damage as Silas from a Bard ultimate. So unless you can use it for like a weird engage or a weird way to save yourself, it's just probably not worth it. LGD V5 Sunning. I'm glad that V5 is kind of down here. Ever since they started switching up their roster, like I just hope that they fail, because I don't understand how you can take out SamD and put in Y4 after the amount of success that they've had throughout this entire split. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's hilarious when they subbed it, the one game where they put in Y4, and this sort of it actually exposes a flaw in the eGOAT system potentially, but it definitely supports your point. V5 was so bad in Summer Split that swapping out SamD for Y4 in the eGOAT rankings plummeted V5 to last.
Wow.
So they were, and this is when they were still like 5th, 6th in that, up there with LGD before their last couple games, which was just, I was like, they went in and like I honestly thought I had put a typo in somewhere and had a bust in like my formulas, because I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, it's Y4. He like didn't win a game the entire straight split.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, like last season when I was watching those games, a lot of the time I didn't really hate Y4. I didn't hate Mole. I thought that the guy they had CLX was kind of interesting in a lot of games. Like he would play.
They're versatile, right? Like
exactly.
they did some neat stuff. Like they knew they were. outmatched, but did some neat stuff, like similar to what I forget who did it in the LCK with Smeb and so on, but just sort of,
KT, yeah.
they would, CLX was, nominally their support, and then he's up top or in the mid lane, and
Yeah.
they're sort of messing with you a little bit, which was neat.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that, like, they would take I think Y4 was the player that would go to the mid lane, and then Mole would be in the bot lane. Like, just
Mole
weird.
played a couple of games up top or two, or at least that was what they had on their,
Yeah.
roster card.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of unfortunate for V5. I mean, everybody was hyping them up, and like I jumped off the V5 bandwagon. Actually, I was never really on the V5 bandwagon outside of like making funny jokes for that highlight video that I would do. But
But I think you were, as everyone was starting to jump on the bandwagon, I think you were throughout it saying, look, these guys are good, but let's,
yeah.
temper our expectations for what's going to happen
Yeah.
going forward here.
Because like when I was saying, like, let's kind of relax a little bit, I wasn't saying they're horrible. So like
Yeah.
I was trying to give them credit, but like I knew that talking positively about them was going to like kind of throw me in with everybody else. So I was like trying to be even understated at sometimes. So the next group, EDG and RNG. I think RNG is probably getting too much love in the rankings, but EDG is really interesting to me. When I, like, before the season started, when I was doing the overrated, underrated teams, I think I had EDG and RNG in the middle tier, but overrated, because like they have these big names that are talented players, but they just were not as good as people thought they were going into the split. And then we started seeing them lose matches, and then everyone just jumps off and they're like, "Oh, these teams are garbage. They're not talented. Let's put Cryan in the mid lane instead of Xiaohu, and do all this other weird stuff." But like, that's the difference between how I look at things and how most of the other people that are giving their opinions on esports look at things, because they're a lot more reactive. Like when I'm saying I think that they're overvalued, I'm not saying Xiaohu sucks. I'm just saying he's good, but he's not that good. So like now, when everybody was off of them, I was continuously playing EDG as an underdog, RNG as an underdog, or like in these close matchups where they should have been big favorites and stuff. So I've loved it. I love when these kinds of talented teams are underappreciated by the public. And then the top three, I think the top three teams are kind of indisputable at this point. I love it how at the end of last season everybody hated IG, mid-season cup everybody hated IG, and the whole time I'm just like, yeah, they're pretty good. They're like, they have two of the best players in China still. Like, probably should watch out for those guys. And then they just start dominating everyone the entire season. It's just insane how like, I mean, because I do question a lot of the stuff that I say. I'll be like, oh yeah, Invictus is fine. Ning will probably be good. He'll figure it out. Like, he's a good player. He's a world champion. Why wouldn't he be able to figure out? Oh yeah, Baolan, sure. He was like often thought of as the weak point of the championship team, but he's still a good player, still a professional player. Like, they should be fine with this kind of roster. And then everybody just wanted to kill them the whole time. And here we are. People, they're the number one team in ESPN's rankings this week. Is Invictus Gaming.
Oh, Invictus Gaming, yeah, that makes more sense.
It's like, it's just crazy, like how much their opinions change. And I'm sure there will be times where I look like a crazy person for my opinions, and like they don't like backdoor cover, which is kind of how a lot of this stuff is going right now. But now that I think of it, I don't really recall many times where I've looked like a complete psychopath in regards to League of Legends stuff. Maybe Santos. I'm still really high on Santos, but they've been kind of disappointing everybody the last couple of weeks. I love Santos. Yeah, they're so much fun to watch.
We should throw. We don't even have to do the full BRCC. We should just every week mention that they're the top team, so that we can agree on that one.
Are they still? That's funny. I just brought it up on the on your Twitter. So Santos, Pain Gaming.
Yeah, Pain Gaming. They're really close, but yeah, Santos still up top.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, so I mean that's basically it. Let's see for the global power rankings. I'll just go through my top teams, and you can give me a reaction to like if you think it makes sense compared to the numbers you've been looking at. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'll start at 13 actually. So the 13th best team right now in the world, I think, is Mad Lions, and they have been losing a little bit, and I think that's been freaking people out in Europe. But it really hasn't changed my opinion very much on Mad Lions because I've had them in that range for a pretty long time. And a lot of it's just giving credit to a team that's at the top of their region and will eventually go to Worlds, and they will eventually get like one random win over a good Chinese team or something, and then people will be like hyping them up and say, "See, I told you they're like the fifth best team in the world," and then at the end of the day they'll be like 12th or 13th or something like that. Same thing with C9, who I have at 12. Same thing with G2, who I have at 11th. Like I want these teams to do well at Worlds. Like that'd be really cool to watch. But if I'm betting money on it, I want to take advantage of the Western audience, like throwing money at these teams because they want them to win when their odds are going to be juiced up. Like that's going to be a huge thing to exploit during the international tournaments. 10th place.
Yeah. I get just jumping quickly there.
Sure.
All I'll add there is on Mad Lot. I think that we've had a difference, or the my numbers and your rankings have been different on Mad Lions and G2, but they're not lined up. But Mad Lions, even though they've been steadily underneath G2 in the eGOAT rankings, they've always been a top 3 team in the LEC in the eGOAT rankings.
Yeah.
And despite the nominal struggles or supposed struggles over the past couple weeks, their eGOAT ranking has never been higher than 1200, and it's never been lower than 950. They just sort of stay right in that range. So by these numbers, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then I mentioned before that the numbers for my league adjustments are nothing really that I trust yet. But my sort of assumption, I operate under the assumption that the LPL and the LCK are the better leagues by far, because people that I have found to be trustworthy as I've tried to learn about League of Legends, without exception, say that. And it's you, it's Gelati, it's guys that I have found to know what they're talking about. The guys that have sort of taught me the stuff that has turned out to be right have said that all along.
Sure.
So I haven't seen any real cross league matches in my short LOL fandom other than the EUM and MSC. Yeah. But that is sort of my operating assumption. Numbers are not going into Worlds as well.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's right. Okay, so then next we have the top 10, and every team in the top 10 is from the LPL or LCK. Number 10 is V5. And I could easily see myself taking V5 out of the top 10 and even dropping them below the European teams and the North American teams, having somebody like G2, C9, Mad Lions, World Elite, Rogue jump them. Rogue would surprise me, because I don't think Rogue is as good as even Team Liquid or TSM, and I'd probably let a different LPL team jump them before Team Liquid or TSM, like another team like LGD or EDG. But V5, there's I get that people like Weiwei and Mole and PP God, and they should like SamD more than they do, but now it's probably a question mark because of Y4 coming in and stuff like that. Like, they should like these players, but BuBu, I think BuBu has kind of been a player that you should be afraid of in a lot of matchups because they're not a top level player. So even when you saw like V5 against Sunning, one of the reasons why I was very, very bullish on Sunning in that matchup was because of Bin and SFM against BuBu and Weiwei. So like those are the kinds of matches that when we look back and we think about V5's trajectory throughout the season and how like we were overrating them against certain teams and underrating them against other teams, it's going to be because of like how these kinds of matchups played out. So number 9, I have Sunning. I love Sunning. I think they're a very interesting team. They haven't been playing as many matches recently, or at least nothing like no hyped matches where like they're an important kind of match, but they should have some this week. They play FPX, right? They play against FPX this week. And then the next team I have is FPX. So FPX and Sunning, whoever wins that match, I'll probably just put them above the other one and call it a day. Then I have Gen G. And I wouldn't be surprised if Gen G fell below FPX or Sunning. There's just something about Gen G I just don't like. When I watch their games, it's like kind of like you know what's going to happen. Ruler's going to get some random kills for some reason, and then he's going to start carrying the team fights, and then they're going to win the game. There's no way that it should happen as often as it does for them. It just doesn't look right. I don't know how else to describe it. I would have to like break it down in film with like arrows and stuff, but I just can't shake the feeling that they're kind of frauds. And it's probably because when I did the last time that I did that was when I was doing the film review for the T1 and Gen G in the finals last split, and I just realized like there's no way that Gen G can beat T1. Every time that they get into a questionable spot where they have to make a tough decision, they just make the wrong decision. Like I can guarantee that they will make the wrong decision. So maybe they figured that out, and maybe I just have a lot of bad bias.
It seems suboptimal.
Yeah, it's really not great when you always make the wrong decision. Then
sounds like me and DFS the last couple of days.
That's funny. The top 6 teams, I'm very confident that they are 6 of the best teams in the world, but not necessarily the 6 best teams in the world. Like I think the range of outcomes for all of these teams keeps them within the top 10. Whereas if like Sunning, if Gen G fell out of the top 10 altogether, I wouldn't be totally surprised. If V5 fell out of the top 10 altogether, I wouldn't be so surprised. I feel like FPX and Sunning have more upward mobility, but that's probably not giving Gen G enough credit. So the top 6 teams, I have T1 at 6, JDG at 5, DRX at 4, Invictus Gaming at 3, Damwon Gaming at 2, and Top Esports at 1. So the one thing that I would say is that I'm pretty skeptical of myself at this point, because I know that Top Esports, Damwon Gaming, and Invictus Gaming are the much flashier teams. They have higher kill scores. They make more aggressive plays. They're more aggressive in the early game. And that's kind of what attracts public sentiment a lot of the time. So I feel like I could potentially be overrating all 3 of these teams relative to the scenarios they're going to find themselves against a team like DRX or JDG or T1. So we could get into the knockout stages of Worlds where like Top Esports is on the same side of the bracket as Damwon Gaming, Invictus Gaming, and then some other random team, and then you have a bunch of highly volatile matches. One of them gets to the finals and wins the finals, and then everybody feels like they were justified in thinking that those teams were so good. But if it was like a mix where Top Esports has to play against a team like JDG or T1, and they have these like long drawn out macro games, they would look a lot weaker, or at least not as dominant. And that's why at these points where the meta is kind of extreme, and like when the storyline of a game is kind of understood before the game even starts, where you know they're going to go to every single dragon, you know they're going to do a Rift Herald at 8 minutes. Like there's so much known about the storyline of every game right now that like you can play hyper aggressive because you do know what the enemy team is going to do. When the game is less predictable from that perspective, that's really when a team like DRX, JDG, or T1 shines, because in order to get to that late game point that they're trying to get to, they have to make more difficult decisions to get to that point. And that's why T1 always seems to do really well at the end of the year and in Worlds, is because of that.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, it's like in different sports, it's like in basketball, the old maxim is that it's generally easier for a fast team to get a slow team to play up to their pace, because you just start running and people want to run, and it's fun to do fast breaks, and you get the other team to break down. You really need discipline to slow the ball down and take 20 seconds off the shot clock every possession, right? So if I'm understanding you, it's sort of more meta based than opposed to sort of which style is able to more frequently sort of impose its will.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like we use the term meta to describe like the optimal plays within a specific patch, or like within a certain subsection of the game throughout the year, and like when I talk about the meta, I'm talking about from a game system perspective. Like the game is hard coded from patch to patch. You cannot say like the first day of the patch this champion was really strong, and then the last day of the patch this champion was really weak. That champion was the same champion the entire time. Like that would be like saying, I mean there's no other way to say it really. It's like if you gave a player a Madden rating at the beginning of the split, and the rating was not going to change throughout the split no matter what. It's not based off of performance or anything like that. Then they would be the same number at the end of the game's life cycle. So like if you turned on MVP Baseball 2009, the best player when the game was released is the best player when the game becomes obsolete. That's how League of Legends works.
And I guess the one thing that could change that, right, is the fact is the what the other team is doing, right?
Yeah,
Because
the popularity
everything changes.
of other things. Yeah.
Right. And so it's sort of like I guess does saying that assume that from game one of the patch the public has figured out how to maximize the champions as they now sit post change, right? Because it's
That's
like,
why
oh,
things
like,
change.
you know what I mean? Because right, because like people like I forget which patch, like Kha'Zix got buffed, and it was like it took like a week before people realized like, oh, Kha'Zix jungle is really strong now, and that would that changes then which counter champions people are playing, and so that like that was the like piece which is to me is the only nuance of what you were saying. But
So,
I mean your statement makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Right?
So patch the patch. Like day one of a patch, you kind of know how it's going to play out if you have a correct view of the game going into that patch. So if you have
and if you're able to game out those sort
draft
of
scenarios,
the dominoes, right? Because it's like this changes this, and then that makes this person stronger, and then I'll do this, and it's sort of a counter to a counter to a counter.
Yeah, and that's pretty true, I think, in general. And like, yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that we could get into where it's like, the basic way of playing League of Legends is team fighting around your AD carry and your mid laner. You just let them become the strongest members on your team, and then you're gonna fight around Dragon, you're gonna fight around Baron, and that's gonna figure out the game. Like that's what teams revert to when things aren't going their way. So the teams that are very good at that always have chances to win a game. It's like in chess, the end game grinders, the people who, like, I don't know if you're familiar, but like Magnus Carlsen is the best player in the world, and he's been the best player for a long time. He's relatively young, but he's been the best player for a long time, and all he tries to do is get like a one pawn advantage, and then he just maneuvers around the board, and then he beats you somehow. It's like he doesn't play for these kind of flashy kinds of games, and whenever it gets to the end game where you have to make these exact moves and like calculate 15 moves ahead or something, he's able to do it better than everybody else. And that's what late game League of Legends is like, where if you can set yourself up from the draft to operate well in those end game scenarios, then you have a chance to beat anybody. And that's the difference between how a team like Top Esports, Damwon Gaming, C9, G2 approaches the game, and a team like DRX, JDG, or T1. Like those, the T1, JDG, DRX, I feel like they're more end game focused, macro focused. That's often what we refer to as macro, is because eventually they want to get to the point in the game where they have to make tough decisions, and they will make the right decision. So it's, I think that's kind of why we're seeing the volatility of G2 and C9 play out within the regular seasons as well. Same thing with Mad Lions. It's just Mad Lions is similar to G2 and C9 from the style they play, but in terms of variance, they haven't been hit by variance as hard. And then OG is like a macro team where everything has gone wrong for them, so now they look like garbage.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's basically it. 50 minutes, not horrible. That's basically how these go.
It's worth for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
No, I guess I just threw this together while you were going through there. But if you assume that the average team in the LCK and the LPL are the same, the rankings there line up pretty well with what I have. T1 and TES are a little bit further down, 6 and 7 respectively. Damwon and Gen G up top, with JDG in third. I think as we have in past weeks, almost unanimous on sort of the teams that are there, with just some slight variation in the order.
Yep, and that's what focusing on talent will ultimately do, is keep things pretty constant.
Yeah,
So that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Billy, for coming on and doing this once again. It looks like basketball is getting more and more interesting for you tonight. Um, and we'll talk basketball on a future video.
absolutely.
Uh, but until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.